What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And Chris is joining us from the great city of Washington, D.C. Chris, the Cavs are coming off a 5-day break, a much-needed rest after a hellish schedule to start the season. They are now facing off against one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the NBA, in the Washington Wizards. This is a good jump-off point for the Cleveland Cavaliers as they look to get back on the right page. They've had these harsh conversations, these harsh film sessions, these understandings with one another to try and get back on the same page. What are you looking for to see differently when it comes to how the Cavs come out in the game against the Washington Wizards on Friday night?
To me, Ethan, it's just about, can they capitalize on this opportunity? The next 6 games before they get to the Christmas Day showdown against New York are against below 500 teams. Many of the teams that the Cavs are more talented than, many of the teams that the Cavs should be favored, many of the teams that the Cavs should beat. Can they capitalize? Because all of a sudden, we could be having a completely different conversation about this team in about 2 weeks if they do what they're supposed to do, if they do what they haven't done at the beginning of this season. At the end of these 6 games, they could be 20-11. Think about the feeling around the team then. Think about the conversation around the team. And if they do things the right way, if they focus, if they compete, if they have attention to detail, if they do all these different things that they've talked about over the last couple of days, and they show that they can beat up on lesser opponents, that they can be the team that everybody expects them to be going into the New York game, then all of a sudden there's a different feeling. Then all of a sudden there's a sense of, okay, now we are going like this. The Cavs have been talking about that all season long, and they don't want to be at their best in October, and they weren't. They didn't want to be at their best in November, and they certainly weren't. They want to keep getting better as the season goes on. And they have the opportunity to do that after all the things that they said, after all the things that they did behind the scenes, and with 6 incredibly favorable games coming out of this particular stretch. And it starts Friday night against Washington.
And Chris, you mentioned it there. That 6-game stretch is extremely important as they play against the Washington Wizards on Friday, then the Charlotte Hornets on Sunday. Both of those games were added because they were knocked out of the in-season tournament by the Atlanta Hawks. But next Wednesday, they play the Chicago Bulls. Friday, again, a game against the Chicago Bulls, a little bit of a road and home series there. Charlotte Hornets again on Monday, and then the New Orleans Pelicans. So as you mentioned, Chris, these are all very favorable. But when it comes to how this team is going to be perceived after that stretch, I'm more so looking at how they fail to be complacent, fail to get back into this comfortable state when we talk about how this Cavs team can get that way when they start to have a level of success, when they start to build a level of confidence. Because after these 6 games, they have some tough opponents when you look at the end of the month of December. The New York Knicks, as you mentioned, the Houston Rockets, the San Antonio Spurs, who have shown difficult for the Cavs, and the Phoenix Suns, who we know are coached by Jordan Knott. I just think that there's a possibility for the Cavs to come in and go, as you said, undefeated over these next 6 games. But then, is there going to be a regression? Is there going to be some kind of fall off once again? And one, how are the Cavs going to respond? And 2, how are the fans going to respond if that happens? Because we know the NBA season is not linear. And I'm curious for you, what's more important, the 6-game stretch of how they get off from the 5-day break, or the latter half of the month of December and where the Cavs end up when the new year hits?
Look, I think, Ethan, anytime you're talking about the Cavs, you're not measuring them against the Wizards. You're certainly not measuring them against the Pelicans or the Hornets or the Bulls. You want to see how they play against the upper echelon teams in the NBA. Can they get their competition ramped up? Can they do the things offensively and defensively that they want to do? Can their bench provide some kind of boost to help supplement what they get from the starting group? Can they defend at a high enough level? All these different things, you want to see that against the top teams. But this stretch is really, really important because they have to build to that. And because after everything that they have said over the last couple of days, now they've got to put those words into action. Now it can't just be, talk. Now it can't just be something that becomes a footnote in their season. There's a real opportunity here for them. And I think everybody inside the organization would admit it. The Cavs have not played well enough. The Cavs have not played up to their standard. They are one of the most disappointing teams in the entire NBA through the first 25 games. It's on them to change that. If they don't like that perception, if they don't like that characterization, they have to change it. And they start changing it right now during this 6-game stretch, and they build momentum. They build confidence. They build camaraderie. They build connectivity. All of that leading into those tougher games so that it feels like they're going the right direction. There's a better feeling around the team going into those matchups where we get a real gauge of who this team is and how far they've come over the last 2 weeks, how far they've come in the second portion of this schedule. Kenny Atkinson said, Ethan, he wanted 25 games. He got 25 games. Now they're past the 25 game mark. They're going into the 30, then they're going into the 35, then they're going into the 40, close to the halfway point. And all of these different benchmarks throughout the course of the regular season, that's how they have it kind of segmented. And the belief around the NBA, whether you talk to players, you talk to coaches, you talk to executives, the season starts on Christmas Day. That's when players really start getting into it. And then you get into the dog days and you get close to All-Star break. But the season starts on Christmas Day. And for the Cavs, that's the measuring stick. New York's a measuring stick type opponent, right? The Suns, if they're full strength, if Devin Booker is back in the lineup, that's more of a measuring stick than certainly Washington, Charlotte, and Chicago. But it's on them to capitalize on this opportunity, this week and a half, these 6 games, so that they can build toward that. And they just have to show. They just have to show that they're different. I don't know if it's definitely a number thing. I don't know if it's an outcome. I don't know if it's a point differential thing. But they have to show that they're different, because in the first 25 games, they just haven't looked the part of a legitimate title contender. And look, there are circumstances surrounding that. There's no doubt about it. I think everybody would admit it. The schedule has been grueling. The guys that have been missing, that's played a part in and out of the lineup. 13 different starting lineups. Certain guys not able to play back-to-backs. There are uncontrollable things that have been problematic for them, that have played a part, at least, in them being 14-11. Played a part in them being one of the most disappointing teams in the NBA. But there are also things in their control that they just haven't done well enough. Not consistently, anyway. And those are the things that they've got to show that they realize, that they understand, that they are going to fix, and they have to show that they are correctable. That's the other thing. We're having all these different conversations about the things that need to get better for this team. They've got to show that these just aren't deep-rooted flaws that are going to be fatal for them when, they're up against a team like the New York Knicks, or they're up against a team like the Phoenix Suns, or as the schedule gets tougher and the opponents are different than Washington and Chicago and things along those lines.
And Chris, because the Washington Wizards aren't going to pose that much of a threat to the Cleveland Cavaliers, I don't want to go into a preview of this game as much, but I do think we have to do the due diligence of doing some injury updates. These are the players that are out for the Washington Wizards game for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Jared Allen, who was a partial participant for practice on Thursday in Cleveland, he did not take contact, which I think is definitely something to keep an eye on, especially after he was a full participant in practice on Tuesday. Sam Merrill is also out for the Cleveland Cavaliers. He began shooting with his right hand. It was a very short workout for him when it comes to getting just the feel and the touch of his hand that is still recovering from trying to deter Giannis Antetokounmpo from getting to the rim. Definitely something that is more difficult to recover from because of the structure of the hand, the importance of the hand for Sam Merrill. It's because it's shooting hand. Larry Nance Jr. is also out. He went through an individual workout after Cavs practice today. He was wearing a compression sleeve on his injured calf. Max Strus is also still out. We understand that he is on a similar timeline to what had originally been scheduled for him. Kenny Atkinson would not allude to if he was going to be quicker or slower. There had not been any setbacks, at least for Max Strus in this context. So then you look at the Washington Wizards injury report. Bilal Coulibaly, Corey Kispert, Chris Middleton, and Alex Sarr are all ruled out for Friday night's game. I think obviously then you look at how this can be beneficial for a player like Evan Mobley. And we continue to look at these matchups where it allows him to be aggressive, where it allows him to try and dictate the terms of the contest when you talk about having the ball in his hands, whether he's creating from the free throw line extended, whether he's creating from the dunker spot, whether he is the offensive hub. I think there's different opportunities for Evan Mobley and Kenny Atkinson to tinker with what Evan Mobley's goals are for this season when you talk about games like tomorrow. But I think the biggest thing when it comes to this stretch, the last few games of the calendar year for the Cavs, there's only one back to back before the year shifts from 2025 to 2026. And that is when the Cavs play against the Charlotte Hornets on December 22nd and the New Orleans Pelicans on December 23rd. And to me, this is more so looking at what Darius Garland's recovery has looked like. We got to talk to Darius Garland after practice today. He talked a little bit about just the fact that he's still getting acclimated, right? He's only played 9 games into the season. Everybody was kind of catching their breath when it comes to this 5-day off stretch. He instead was still in the gym, was getting extra shots up. He hasn't been satisfied with how his shot profile, shot quality, and shot production and efficiency has been to start the season. And I think when you talk about a player, and you've seen it with Joe Burrow, this could be a season long conversation about Darius Garland, who is playing with a splint in his toe, in his shoe, while he's playing in games. And some points he's playing with a spacer as well to alleviate some of the pain in his toe. Chris, what do you think about just the level of curiosity that is still there when it comes to Darius Garland's injury? What level of Darius Garland he's trying to get to, especially when we talk about playoff caliber Darius Garland, but also him having to still work through things to feel like he can be his best self.
I think it's just a difficult injury for him to play through. And we've talked about this so many different times on the podcast, Ethan, that there is a difference between being healthy enough to play and suit up and being effective playing through injury. And this is a very difficult injury. Over the summer, the Cavs did a lot of research. They talked to a lot of different people. They studied turf toe, and they wanted to prepare themselves as best they could for all of the different obstacles that they were going to deal with. And they read about Joe Burrow, and they talked to people surrounding Joe Burrow, and they looked at the history of NFL players with turf toe and NBA players with turf toe, and if there were Major League Baseball players with turf toe, and they just tried to get as much information as possible. And I think the conclusion that they came to is that it was going to be an injury that was going to require constant management. It was going to be an injury that required them to do different things in terms of how much they were going to play Darius, in terms of how much they were going to rest Darius, in terms of how much they were going to have Darius practice and things along those lines, just because it takes constant attention and you've got to pay attention to it and you've got to make sure that it doesn't pop back up and start bothering him. But I think there are just certain movements that are going to be harder for him and more painful for him, especially as he continues to figure out what he can do and what he can't do on this essentially rebuilt toe. And his game is so much about stop and start. It's about quickness. It's about shiftiness. It's about change of direction. And there are certain movements that are probably going to be painful. And I think part of this also, Ethan, is Darius clearing a mental hurdle of, okay, I feel pain, but that doesn't mean I need surgery. Okay, I feel pain, but that doesn't mean that I need to shut it down for a week or 2 weeks. Okay, I'm not moving the way that I would prefer to be moving, but that doesn't mean that this is a re-injury of my toe. So I think it's just an understanding from Darius that certain things are going to be there and it's going to require him to play through. and learn how to play through that and learn how to deal with the I don't want to say a setback, but like when you return from an injury and you're still in the early stages and you're missing back-to-backs and you're trying to get comfortable and all those different things. Um there are going to be days where it just doesn't feel as good, and then there are other days where it's going to feel better than you expect. That's the nature of recovering from an injury, especially a significant one like this that is very, very tricky in terms of its recovery. But the Cavs need a different version of Darius than what they've gotten here at the beginning of the season if they're going to be the team that they want to be, if they're going to be the offense that they want to be, if they're going to be as prolific on the offensive end of the floor as what they were at various points last year, as what they were at various points throughout this early stretch of the season when Darius has been in the lineup. Like a different level of consistency from Darius is going to be required in many cases to be a consistently prolific offense. Because if you don't have him doing the things that make him special, and you don't have Evan being the guy that everybody expected him to be coming into this year, taking that next step, taking a leap into a different stratosphere, then you just don't have enough offensive weaponry, not consistently anyway. So it'll be interesting to see just how Darius manages these 6 games coming off this lengthy break. Part of this was, yes, film session, honest conversations, a deep dive into the things that have not gone according to plan in the first 25 games, but it was also an opportunity to rest. It was also an opportunity to recover mentally and physically. And it'll be interesting to see what version of Darius the Cavs get here as this season continues to progress. The other thing is they've got to get their messaging clear because once again, um, people have not been on the same page. I reported a long time ago that when Darius came back, that he wasn't going to be able to play back-to-backs and that there was a plan to not have him play back-to-backs. And that was established in the summertime. And that was Darius, that was the coaching staff, that was the front office, and that was the medical staff all coming together and saying, this is what's going to be best for Darius, especially early in his recovery. And Kenny Atkinson, very shortly after Darius made his debut, said that, hey, we haven't taken back-to-backs off the table. Well, yeah, they did. And now Darius, earlier today, following practice, said, hey, this was a plan that was mapped out in the summer, that this is how we were going to do it, with no back-to-backs, with keeping my workload down, keeping my minutes down, not pushing it too much. So they've got to, again, work on the messaging of this thing because you had Kenny Atkinson say one thing immediately after Darius returned, and you had Darius again saying something different today, reflecting back to what was the plan in the summertime. And then when Darius doesn't play back-to-backs because Kenny Atkinson said, hey, those aren't off the table, people get a little bit alarmed by it. People are like, what happened? Did he have a setback? Did he re-injure himself? Da-da-da-da-da. And yes, there was a re-injury in there against Miami. But the messaging has to be a little bit more clear when it comes to all of these different injuries so that it doesn't open themselves up to criticism or further questioning of how they're going about these things.
Darius Garland also mentioned that it was a doctor decision. He would love to be out there playing back to backs, but he's also trying to do the mature things that we've talked about with this group, trying to do what is best for him, but also for the team in the long run. And I thought it was funny that you mentioned that the Cavs need to get on the same page because when we talked to him about the film session, the immediate question after the mental challenges, the frustration of not being able to play in back to backs, he said that we all got to get on the same page when it comes to just being on the floor together. And I think that's not only teammates and players on the floor, but it's also the coaching staff and figuring out what this Cavs team's identity wants to be, where they want to be at, and how they want to evaluate every given situation. Because as we all know, sometimes a player will say something to us and then we'll relay it to Kenny Atkinson and he'll be like, Oh, well, I don't know if I agree with that, but I agree with it in some parts. Like when Jalen Tyson called out the team, we asked Kenny Atkinson, and he kind of was taken aback by the fact that Jalen Tyson was the one to say something, but we all were, right? That's kind of the situation that was at hand. But when we talk about this film session, when we talk about holding each other accountable, when it comes to getting on the same page, Darius Garland also mentioned that Kenny Atkinson called out the quote unquote best players and went down the roster from there. That's kind of what we talked about, the uncomfortable conversations with this team, the harsh realities of this organization and the roster and all of these different things. But Kenny Atkinson also mentioned today that the great players want to be coached hard. And Chris, we've seen it around the league, right? Will Hardy of the Utah Jazz calling out his players mid game. Billy Donovan has taken to the press room on multiple occasions to call out the Chicago Bulls and excuses that they've been trying to make or the lackluster performances that they've had. They have not held back on their different conversations with their teams, either internally or to the public. And I'm curious because you mentioned how Kenny Atkinson and the organization has been walking this fine line with conversations with the media and what we've been hearing behind the scenes. How do you view how this Cavs team is utilizing its words and its power and its platform? Because it feels like there's so many different ways for teams to do it. And Kenny Atkinson, of course, we heard it from Steve Kerr, is trying to walk this balance of I'm New York, I'm hard headed. I had these issues when I was first coaching that might have been the reason I got booted from Brooklyn to I'm got all of this lesson learned from when I was in California with the Los Angeles Clippers and in San Francisco when I was with the Golden State Warriors. I'm a little bit calmer now, but maybe I need to bring the New York back a little bit so these players understand the urgency that is necessary for this season.
I think this goes all the way back to the very beginning of the season. I don't know that there was an everybody on board with how to approach the regular season. I think they were stuck in between. Yes, the regular season matters. Yes, we have to build habits. Yes, we have to do the right things, but the regular season doesn't matter. So I think they have struggled with that from the very, very beginning. In saying that, I think this is kind of where Kenny being around Steve Kerr and Ty Lue has really helped him. And I think it goes back to when Kenny first got the job. When he was hired by the Cavs to be the coach that was taking over for JB Bickerstaff, what's the first thing that he did? He reached out to the star players. He tried to foster that relationship with Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, and obviously reconnect with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. He went out to visit those guys. He had sit downs with them. He talked through the roster. He talked through basketball. He talked through non basketball things. And I think his time in Golden State around Steph and Draymond and different personalities and different star players really, really helped him. And I think his time around Steve Kerr helped him and Ty Lue too. Because the one thing that Steve Kerr has become known for is just not giving a crap. Like he will make decisions, sometimes unpopular ones, sometimes decisions that don't work out. But he will make the decisions, the difficult ones, that he thinks are going to be best. He in the game against the Cavs, he started Jonathan Kuminga and they pulled him. And then the next game he was out of the rotation. Jonathan Kuminga is supposed to be part of the future of the Golden State Warriors. Jonathan Kuminga is somebody that they have invested in a big way. But he's gone away from him. That's a difficult decision. That's a delicate decision. So it's not the first time that Steve has done something like that. And I think Kenny, one of the things that he said the other night when Golden State was in town and he was talking about all the different things that he learned being around Steve, um, and being around those different kinds of players, he said, to win championships, you have to take risks. And I'll say this, Ethan, I don't think that Kenny, when it comes to his lineups, when it comes to his combinations, when it comes to, some of these what could be perceived as difficult coaching decisions, I don't think he's made them yet with the Cavs. But when this team gets closer to full strength, if it ever happens, that's when all those difficult decisions start to come because there's only so many minutes available. And it's going to be very, very interesting to me to see how he's going to handle that, to see how the guys are going to be accepting of that. And I think for him to use this week to kind of put his foot down, to call these guys out, and to set a foundation for accountability and to remind them of what that standard is. I don't think it's a coincidence that it came on the heels of playing against the Warriors and Steve Kerr being in town. And I certainly don't think it's a coincidence that it is coming at a time where the Cavs are getting closer and closer, at least they hope, to being at full strength and having some of these difficult decisions. So I think he wanted that foundation of accountability. I think he wanted more of a no-nonsense approach. I think he wanted a reminder of, hey, these are the things that you must do. And if you don't do them, I'm going to call you out in film sessions. Doesn't matter if you're Donovan Mitchell, doesn't matter if you're Evan Mobley, doesn't matter if you're Jared Allen. The name doesn't matter, the contract doesn't matter. And the next step for Kenny, if it gets to this point, if things don't turn around, if they don't play with the consistent competitiveness and the consistent effort and the consistent focus and the consistent attention to detail and all these different things, the next step after that, if it doesn't get corrected, is take away playing time. And I think this week kind of set that standard and set a reminder to these guys that your playing time could be determined by what happens when I watch the film back and see who's bringing it to a different kind of level. And I do think it's interesting. One of the things that I'm going to be looking at, Ethan, is, okay, how does Evan Mobley respond? Evan Mobley's not used to getting called out. He's not. He's been a star since he was in high school. He was the number 3 overall pick, right? He was one of the best players at USC in the conference when he was a freshman. And then he was runner-up for Rookie of the Year. And then he was plastered all over these billboards in downtown Cleveland because he became like the face of the franchise. And there were members of the organization nicknaming him HOF for future Hall of Famer. And then he became a first-time All-Star and Defensive Player of the Year and second-team All-NBA. This is probably one of the few times in Evan's professional basketball career, or just basketball career in general, where, he is being criticized a little bit more, where some of his bad moments are being shown in film sessions. And like DeAndre Hunter said, like the other guys said throughout the course of this week, those were hard film sessions. Those were uncomfortable film sessions. It's difficult to see all of the bad things that you do throughout the course of a game or throughout the course of a week get pulled and highlighted, or in this case, low-lighted in front of your teammates, in front of your coaches, in front of the people that matter the most. And how these guys react to that, I think, is going to be really, really important. And if Kenny goes down the road of taking a guy out of a rotation for a couple of games, benching a guy in an entire second half, somebody other than Luke Travers, how are these guys going to handle it? These are all things that I think are going to be fascinating to watch, especially because it comes on the heels of this film session, which could, emphasis on could, end up being a turning point for this team if they do things the right way moving forward.
This kind of makes Donovan Mitchell look like a prophet because he keeps talking about, like, how are we going to respond? He's been preaching that since last year in like April before the playoffs when they were struggling. How do you respond? How do you keep coming back? How do you not let it snowball? All of these things. And then he used the term then that he's been using now. I would rather this be happening now than when it's in the playoffs or yada, yada, yada. And obviously, this is different because it's December. It's not March or April. It's December. And the Cavs have the opportunity to have these conversations. And you know that they're working because when you talk to these players after practice or after shoot around, since the film sessions, if you ask the player what was talked about, they'll be like, oh, these are the areas that we tried to focus on. And it's funny because these things that they are talking about, DeAndre Hunter was talking about getting caught ball watching, right? That's something we've talked about when it comes to DeAndre Hunter. Darius Garland just talked about playing harder, playing through injury, playing through contact. That's something that he personally has had to do. So these guys have kind of unintentionally given us a window into the conversations that they've had personally, internally, about what areas they want to improve coming out of this break. And obviously, Donovan, we haven't gotten to speak with him after the harsh conversations and the harsh film sessions and the player led meetings just yet. But I can basically think of what he would say because of how many times he said the same things. And it's not out of regurgitating the same lines, it's how he truly feels about this group and how he looks at this team and the capabilities and the talent on the roster and what that looks like going into a playoff series. But he understands, and again, here comes that buzzword, mental toughness is still the area that this team needs to overcome. And he has had this plastered everywhere for his own brand. Don, determination over negativity. How do you respond to when things are going bad? How do you respond when you have players injured? How do you respond where you don't have a good game, but you still need to make an impact on the floor? These are different areas where I think he's been trying to derive and pull it out of his teammates. And it feels like these are the types of conversations that are going to allow that to fully come to fruition, especially when you have these in depth, harsh, sometimes even cruel conversations. And Evan Mobley might be at the forefront of that. So I agree with you there, Chris.
I mean, the reason why these things continue to come up, Ethan, is because they simply have not answered these questions. They linger. Donovan Mitchell is wondering about them, right? Just like we are. Everybody that watches the Cavs is wondering the same thing. So what do you think the players inside are thinking? What do you think Donovan Mitchell's thinking? It doesn't mean that they can't prove everybody wrong. It doesn't mean that they can't change the reputation. It doesn't mean that they can't go on this run similar to what the Indiana Pacers did. I mean, Indiana last year was 10-15 at the same point. They didn't get back over the 500 mark until early January. So it wasn't all just roses and sunshine for the Pacers. They had real stuff that they had to go through. Some of those things outside their control, just like the Cavs outside their control. But going through those struggles, going through those tests early in the season, it allowed them to come together in a different way. It made them stronger. It made them tougher. It galvanized them. I think there are legitimate questions about what it's going to do to the Cavs. So we just have to let it play out. We have to wait and see. But until they prove it to a different level with a different level of consistency, these questions are going to linger. That's the thing. Everybody inside that locker room knows it. Everybody on the coaching staff knows it. This team still has a lot to prove.
They will have the opportunity to respond to adversity, as Donovan Mitchell would put it, by playing against 6 teams before their last 4 of the month, where you understand that they cannot play down to their opponent, right? And I wrote an article about this when they played the Washington Wizards for the first time at Capital One Arena. The line score for tomorrow's game is negative 14.5
Right.
in favor of the Cavs. That probably is the highest it can go for true betting odds based on how the Cavs have played this season. But that should feel light to the Cavs. They should try and drop 30 on the Washington Wizards.
Evan Mobley and Darius Garland should not see the floor in the fourth quarter. They should
I
do what OKC did the other night to the Phoenix Suns. They should do what the Denver Nuggets did tonight to the Sacramento Kings, where in Sacramento they started chanting, "Sell the team, sell the team." Jokic had 36, 12, and 8 through 3 quarters, didn't have to play in the fourth quarter. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has played maybe half the fourth quarters for the Thunder. Like, if the Cavs are the team that they say they are, if the Cavs are the team that they believe they are, when they play against a wounded Washington team on the heels of everything that they have talked about over the last couple of days, their first opportunity to get back on the floor after this film session. Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, the mainstays on this team, should not see the floor in the fourth quarter. They should not have to be on the floor where you're wondering, is the margin wide enough? Or is the game already locked up? Like, this thing should be over quickly.
That's the mindset of the team, right? Compete level, intensity. This is the first test for the Cavs, right? We're not talking about, are they more talented than the next 6 games? We know that they're more talented than teams over the next 6 games, but you cannot, one, play down to your opponent. You cannot allow teams like the New Orleans Pelicans and Derek Queen to dictate contests and allow them to do things that they want and are successful at. You have to be assertive in your goals. You cannot be reactive to some of these teams. And I think the Cavs understand that. And as you mentioned, Chris, even in that game between the OKC Thunder and the Phoenix Suns, Shai Gilgeous scored 28, which is low for him, but he was still the leading scorer. That shows you that everybody on the roster, not just Evan Mobley, not just Darius Garland, not just Donovan Mitchell, need to show up, need to have the same mindset. And as Darius Garland said, they all need to be on the same page. They all need to have the same mindset. They all need to have that same energy and intensity. It cannot just come from the bench unit when they sub in 7 minutes into the game. The starters have to come with that energy to begin the contest. But we'll get to see and find out if the Cavs are capable of doing so and actually put words to actions, or if this conversation that we've been having is just lip service. But I think against the Washington Wizards, the Cavs, if they don't come out with the same level of energy, might get off on the right foot. But that's not the point. This is how the Cavs respond. This is how the Cavs come into contests and showcase who they want to be, no matter the opponent. And with all of that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy. We can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.